It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. For this week, I'm going to talk about one of the kind of very top tier giant monster movies of the 50s. This is 1954's Them, directed by Gordon Douglas. Now, before we get too much into this here, what I'm holding here in my hand right now is the Warner Archive collection from Warner Brothers, DVD for Them. And I just want to read to you what they have on here at the very top of this box that is the best tagline I've ever seen for any movie on any poster or any VHS or DVD box. It reads, "A horror horde of crawl and crush giants clawing out of the earth from mile-deep catacombs." That's about just reading that alone. I don't care if the movie's fried green tomatoes. I'm buying it just for that little tagline there. But as I said, this is directed by Gordon Douglas. Now, Gordon Douglas kind of had an interesting career. He worked from 1935 to 1977 as a director. He did do some stuff with Hal Roach Studios, which, by the way, I want to really call that out. We're talking about a movie about giant bugs here, and the guy who directed it got to start with Hal Roach. You kidding me, right? But anyway, he did do some R Gang shorts, which are the Little Rascals guys, and he also assisted on some Laurel and Hardy shorts in like 33, 34, somewhere around there. But once he started kind of directing his own features, he did, of course, Them, which is highly, highly thought of in the monster genre, particularly the post-nuclear age, atomic age monster movies. But he did movies like the really, really popular kind of James Bond clone for American audiences in like Flint. He also did the sequel to In the Heat of the Night, which was called They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. And his final film was Viva Knievel, which starred Evel Knievel himself. And I always like to call this as kind of part of what I call Evel Knievel exploitation. There were a lot of movies in the 70s that either featured Evel Knievel, was a documentary about him, was a dramatized movie about him, or had a character like him. And that's definitely, I think, a reason to call it something along the lines of an exploitation subgenre. But really, Douglas ended up working with a whole bunch of really big people like Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, James Cagney, Liberace, Doris Day, Errol Flynn. He worked with some of the best people, and but he never really made anything that really kind of necessarily stood out in its own or was kind of award worthy or anything like that. He just was a solid director. Now, there are a handful of pretty good stars in this movie. In fact, once we get to the end of this episode and I start talking about my 3 likes, definitely the cast is one of them. But the primary 2 stars, the first is James Whitmore. Now, James Whitmore, he had a long-ass career too, but he was an Emmy, Grammy, and Tony Award winner. He was twice nominated for Oscars. Now, there's always that big, what they call the EGOT, which are people who can win an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. James Whitmore was very, very close. He had 2 opportunities to get that Oscar, but it didn't quite work out. His 1975 Best Actor nomination was for Give 'Em Hell, Harry, where he played Harry Truman. That's a one-man show. So the dude had some acting chops for sure. The other primary star was James Arness. Now, of course, James Arness, we talked about him previously in The Thing from Another World, but also, I mentioned that, of course, he was most notable for being Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke. Now, funny story about this. Disney was brought to look at this film to potentially cast Arness as Davy Crockett. However, they ended up being a little bit more wowed by Fess Parker, who plays a very bit part in this, but an actual kind of important part in this, where he's being held up in a hospital because he keeps saying that he saw something when he was flying around that looked like something that was in the shape of an ant. And they looked at that and said, that's the guy we want for Davy Crockett. However, John Wayne saw this movie, and he was friends with James Arness and ended up striking up a friendship with him at least, and remembered him for when the Matt Dillon character came around for Gunsmoke. He ended up recommending James Arness off the strength of this movie. So, and that started just like a year or two after this movie came out. So, I mean, James Arness was right on the border of becoming an extremely popular television star. Another big-time actor in this is the part of this kindly little old doctor that's an ant professor or an ant scientist. But that's Edmund Gwynn. Now, he's best known as playing Kris Kringle in Miracle on 34th Street, which in and of itself is a massively popular movie and often gets played quite a bit during the Christmas season. So most people would know who he is, even if he isn't immediately recognizable in this movie because he's not dressed up like Santa Claus. One other note, Leonard Nimoy has a bit part as an army guy in one of the scenes in this. So, you know, this movie's not without some pretty popular people. Now, the production for this began in 1953. Now, originally, this was intended to be a color 3D movie. However, the 3D test never happened because Warner Brothers had this 3D camera rig that ended up malfunctioning. And when they were able to finally get some of the 3D shots, they weren't all that impressed with it. They didn't really want to do that. And without the 3D gimmick, they didn't really want to put the money in to doing it in color. So they just shifted to widescreen black and white. Now, they hope to emulate the shock and awe of a movie that they released the year before, which I think if you listen to this episode or to the episode last week, you might recognize the movie that they're hoping to emulate, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Again, somehow, a lot of these monster movies, kind of the singularity that's in common with all of these movies is The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But they still did the title card with the black and white backdrop and the red and blue title for the movie. So they did keep that little bit of color to kind of help stick out a little bit. Now, a lot of the shots that were set up for the 3D movie were also kept, like people shooting flamethrowers towards the camera, various, the same old trickery that you often see with people sticking things in the camera. They kept a lot of that. Now, the ant effects in this were supervised by a fellow named Ralph Ayers, but it's not really... It's much more of a mechanical thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this episode. But they used some tree frogs and some assorted birds to make the ants' voices in the movie. So the movie begins with the New Mexico State Police basically responding to a call. They find a little girl that's just kind of walking alone and in shock, essentially. They check out a trailer that is radioed to be kind of up the road a little bit, and they find that is wrecked and abandoned, and they assume that whoever owned the trailer probably is the parents to this little girl that they found. But inside the trailer, there's some money. So it's not really a robbery or anything crime related like that. There is a bloody shirt and a gun, but they also find a bunch of like sugar cubes kind of all over the place. Now, as the investigators come, they hear bizarre chirping, which makes the little girl sit up in the back of the ambulance, but then once it goes away, she kind of goes back into her catatonic state. So the two primary cops, which one is Ben Peterson, who is James Whitmore, they go to a general store to see if the elderly shop owner knows anything or has seen anything, but the store is a mess, and one of the walls has been blown out, basically, and they find the body of the old man. Now, Peterson leaves his partner behind while he goes to talk to the investigators and get them to come by the general store. But the partner hears that chirping sound and goes outside to investigate and fires on something unseen and then goes missing. They discover that the trailer was indeed owned by an FBI agent on a 2-month leave with his wife and 2 kids. This brings in FBI agent Robert Graham, who is James Arness, to help out with the investigation. Now, the real mystery is kind of comes down to the amount of formic acid that was found in the body of the general store owner. And so they they end up meeting with Dr. Harold Medford and his daughter, Pat, to basically take a look at the case. Now, they are specifically myrmecologists, who are scientists who study ants. And Dr. Medford is able to use formic acid to shock the little girl out of her catatonic state, and she just keeps screaming "them" over and over. So the Medfords are basically quick to deduce that ants are getting very big, or at least are becoming very carnivorous and very hungry for people. And sure enough, while investigating out by where the trailer was, they see a giant ant. And they do discover that if they shoot the antennae, that's good, but machine gunning the shit out of their bodies really kind of works best. But now they know for sure the giant ants are out here, and they really need to find the nest very quickly. So while flying over the desert, they do see one of the ants carrying a human rib cage out of this hole, and it's like there with a bunch of other like skulls and clothing and stuff like that, in which Pat Medford says, like, well, it looks like we found the missing people. It's a really cool and kind of grisly scene. But the army really just wants to bomb the hell out of the nest, but Dr. Medford thinks that that's probably a little bit too dangerous, and it could end up dispersing the ants instead of frying them. So he suggests that they do use heat to basically keep the ants inside their nest and inside their tunnels, then use cyanide to gas them to death. So against Graham and Peterson's wishes, Pat does go with them after they've cyanide and gassed out the nest to basically see what's going on. And her argument is, look, you need a scientist in there so that we know whether or not for sure we have killed the ants and that there's nothing more that we should be concerned about. And sure enough, they do find that most of the ants are dead. There are still a few that are still wandering around that they have to kill, but 2 queen eggs have hatched, and the young queen ants have escaped, possibly with male ants, which is really, really bad. So Medford gives the army basically a lesson on how ants function and how they think, and it turns out that they're somewhat like humans, knowing and understanding how war works and how they can be territorial and how they can basically cause the end of the human race. Because if the ants continue to reproduce, humans will be extinct in about a year. So lots of reports start to come in all over the place. Like a pilot reports encountering a UFO that's in the shape of an ant. That's Fess Parker. And it's that one scene that he has in this movie that Disney said, yep, that's our Davy Crockett. But then Medford then suggests that they pretty much start a search radius for these nests, considering how many eggs a queen can lay, if there are males that have been following the queens, how many they can basically fertilize and so on and so forth. So he basically says we got to start searching from as far south as Panama to as far north as Santa Barbara, California. That's a huge radius that they're working on. But they're now hearing about how boats are being attacked, because boats are docking in Mexico. They're loading up. That leaves the boats open all night. The queen is finding a nice place to drop a bunch of eggs. They hatch. They attack the boats. Everything is crazy. And so now sugar is also being reported being stolen by the tonfuls. So, you got sugar getting raided, people being attacked. There's a couple of kids that have gone missing. And this is just generally creating a very huge problem. So Graham and Peterson start interrogating basically anyone who might have seen the ants. And the search leads them to Los Angeles, where the ants have basically used the sewers and the drainage overflow ducts that run underneath the city that also leads out into the Los Angeles River, that famous non-river that's a river. Peterson does end up locating the nest, but is ultimately killed from the injuries that he sustains while saving the missing kids that were reported in Los Angeles from these ants. Graham ends up finishing off the hive with the army, and Medford is basically left to ponder what other missteps man has made with his entry into the atomic age. All right, let's talk about my 3 likes about this. This movie is a really, really good movie. It's, just to say that off the top of my head, I'm picking only 3 things to specifically talk about, but trust me, this movie is actually one of the better giant monster movies. First and foremost, the cast in this is really, really good. Last week I had talked about how you had a younger scientist and an older mentor that seemed to work really, really well off of each other. Well, in this, you have a pair that are working really, really well off of each other. Between James Whitmore and James Arness, they are both protection-minded people, one just being a cop, the other being an FBI agent. They respect the hell out of one another, even if they have slightly different methods to get to something, and they seem like all they want to do is to protect people and to do the thing that needs to be done to get rid of these ants. It's kind of funny. There's a story that goes where, of course, James Arness is like 6'7" or something like that. James Whitmore was probably no taller than me at like 5'9" or something. Supposedly, James Whitmore would wear lifts in his shoes to try to not look so short around James Arness when they're doing scenes together. But quite frankly, he still looks pretty short next to James Arness. But another funny story about Whitmore is that he's the type of person who, when he's doing a scene and he's talking, he will do more than just say the lines. He will move around the scene. He will use his hands. He'll pick up something from a table. He's always doing something so that while he's talking or while he's doing a scene, people's eyes are drawn to him. And it's kind of funny because it almost seems like James Whitmore is like he's really trying to earn that top billing. But what's funny is that he also comes across as the action guy of the pair. James Arness is doing just as much investigative work. He ends up getting the girl, more or less, which was played by Joan Weldon. And she's quite good in this too. I'll talk about her in just a second. But James Whitmore is the star of this movie, and he is the action star of this movie too. He is constantly like flamethrower and ants all over the place and shooting them with machine guns and stuff. It's he's so low key as the primary action star because they're both very rigid and very by the book people. But James Whitmore is quick to use a flamethrower or a machine gun if somebody's in trouble, and it's kind of awesome. But as I said, Joan Weldon, who played Dr. Pat Medford, who's every bit as competent as her dad. It's just that her dad is still alive and the leading ant guy. But she holds her own very well against the two action heroes, against a room full of government people and army people. She's a very, very good leading lady, and she's pretty, but she's also very stern and very, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm talking about, you follow what I have to say. And then Edmund Gwynn is just kind of this little old grandpa guy who also is really good in this movie too. Just generally speaking, this is a really good collective of actors. While you still have the two leads, who are the two action stars, basically, they play off of each other really, really well, but they also work very well because they have a lot of scenes with Gwynn and Weldon that end up making them just a really good ensemble. Second, I'm going to go with the ant effects in this. Now, unlike a lot of the big monster movies of the time, where you would either have specific actors in suits, like with the Godzilla characters, or you would have artists like like your Willis O'Brien or your Harryhausen, who is doing miniatures and doing stop motion type stuff. This is all very mechanical. This is a team of people from Warner Brothers effects department just building these giant ants. And at times there are 3 or 4 or 5 of these giant ants in a single scene. And now, while being large doesn't really help them look any more realistic, they do work very, very well in this movie, and they look like they really are there. This is not using those camera tricks that we'll see with like the giant behemoth, where the stop motion character is dropped into the live action stuff, or stuff like Tarantula, where you have a real tarantula being filmed to scale and then being blown up and superimposed into the movie. It's not those types of effects. These are real, like, practical, mechanical creatures, and I love that sort of thing. And while they don't necessarily look like real ants, they look like they really belong with the actors. And when they're sitting or when they're standing next to a carcass of one of these things, yeah, that's a dead ant that they're standing next to. So it really kind of helps put you that much more into the danger, that much more into the movie itself. Finally, I really, really, really like the tone of this movie. This movie is not a sci-fi drive-in, guys bring your gals and try to feel them up at the drive-in type of movie that just plays in the background. This is a for real drama. It takes itself very seriously, but not in a way that it makes you feel that you can make fun of. Like, there are real stakes here. The stakes are delivered with aplomb, but not with too much, right? Like, there's there's like a real thing going on here, and people are relaying that properly and with the right amount of emotion and the right amount of feeling, and and it helps that you have these two guys, like the two Jameses, Whitmore and Arness, who are taking this very seriously and still doing their job while also keeping a lid on everything that's going on. And it's, they don't want to get it out to the people because they don't want to create a panic. They don't want to create a problem of any kind with people all of a sudden, looting or being scared or whatever. But they are taking it very, very seriously. And I think that that's something that should really kind of stand out in this movie. This movie is much more of a drama than it is your classic monster movie. It really kind of lines up really, really well with something like Godzilla, which is much more of a drama. It does have something to say about the atomic age. It does have something to really kind of play up to and play along with. So for that, I definitely have to give it high marks for taking itself seriously and appropriately seriously. All right, so that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and now you can find us on Amazon. You can listen to us through Audible, which is connected to Amazon, but you don't need a subscription to Prime or to Audible or anything like that to be able to listen. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, head over to my website, www.bmovieenema.com, and read a new text article and review each and every Friday from me. But if you also want to watch a movie, there's now an episodic B-Movie Enema, the series, that you can find on YouTube. New episodes will be coming out every Saturday from January 2nd to March 27th, 2021. So come watch a full movie with me on YouTube. Just go over to YouTube and search for B-Movie Enema. And you can subscribe to the channel there, but you can also just head over to bmovieenema.com and watch the movies there as well. So until next week, stay spooky.